Keanu Reeves walked into his own restaurant, but no one noticed him. To everyone he was just another customer. That's exactly how he wanted it. He didn't want people to treat him differently just because he was famous or because he secretly owned the place. He wanted to see things as they really were. The restaurant Torx was beautiful. The golden lights made everything warm and welcoming. The smell of grilled steak and buttery garlic filled the air. People laughed, chatted, and clinked glasses together. Rich Hollywood stars sat at one table, while at another, a hard-working family enjoyed a rare night out. Waiters moved quickly, carrying trays full of delicious food. Everything looked perfect. But Keanu felt something was wrong. Even though the customers were happy, he noticed something different about the workers. He had worked in restaurants before, long ago, before he became famous. He knew how hard it was, long shifts, tired feet, rude customers. But this wasn't just normal exhaustion. There was something deeper, something darker. Keanu sat at the bar. The bartender, not knowing who he was, placed a glass of water in front of him. As Keanu wrapped his fingers around the cool glass, he let his eyes sweep across the restaurant. That's when he saw Darren Mitchell, the general manager. Darren stood near the front like a guard watching everything. He wasn't just making sure the restaurant ran smoothly, he was watching the employees in a way that made them uncomfortable. Keanu noticed the way they moved when they passed him, careful, nervous, avoiding his eyes. One waitress even flinched slightly when Darren turned toward her. Keanu's grip on the glass tightened. He had seen this before. A boss who thought he owned people. A man who liked control. Then, through the noise of the restaurant, Keanu heard something. It was quiet at first, a small, muffled sound. But when he turned slightly, he heard it more clearly. Someone was crying. He followed the sound with his eyes until he spotted a small break room near the kitchen. The door was slightly open. Inside, a young waitress stood by the counter, her shoulders shaking. Her fingers gripped the metal surface like she needed something to hold her up. Keanu recognized her. Evelyn. He didn't know her personally, but he had seen her before. She was always quick, professional, and hardworking. But tonight she looked broken. Beside her stood a young waiter, Jason. He leaned in, speaking softly, trying to comfort her. "You can't let him do this to you," Jason said, his voice urgent. Evelyn wiped her eyes, her voice barely above a whisper. "What choice do I have? If I don't do what he says, I'll lose my job." Keanu exhaled slowly. This wasn't just stress. This was fear. Keanu took a sip of water, thinking. He needed to understand what was happening. He couldn't just jump to conclusions. His eyes moved back to Darren Mitchell. Darren was still standing at the front, arms crossed, watching everything like a hawk. Employees walked past him with careful steps, heads down, avoiding eye contact. That was a bad sign. It meant they were afraid of him. Keanu saw another sign too, Jason. The young server walked back onto the restaurant floor, but he looked different. His jaw was clenched. His hands were tight on the notepad at his waist, like he was holding on to it for dear life. His movements were stiff, like he was holding something inside. Keanu saw an opportunity. He got up and walked toward the server station. "Hey man, got a pen?" he asked casually. Jason blinked in surprise. He wasn't expecting a customer to talk to him like that. But he quickly reached into his pocket and handed Keanu a pen. Keanu took it but didn't walk away. Instead, he looked at Jason's name tag. "Jason. Your friend seems upset," Keanu said in a low voice, just loud enough for Jason to hear. Jason's body stiffened. His hands gripped a stack of plates, his knuckles turning white. "She's fine," he said quickly. Too quickly. It was a lie. Keanu tilted his head slightly. He saw the way Jason's eyes flicked toward the break room, then toward Darren Mitchell, and then, finally, down to the floor. That hesitation told Keanu everything. After a long moment, Jason let out a breath. "She's not fine," he admitted in a whisper. Keanu studied him. Jason wanted to talk, but he was afraid. "Is it a customer issue?" Keanu asked, keeping his voice calm. Jason hesitated. He wanted to say yes. He wanted to make up something simple. But instead he whispered, "No, it's not." His eyes darted toward the front of the restaurant, toward Darren. Jason swallowed hard. "It's personal." Keanu didn't believe that. It wasn't just personal. It was about Darren. "How long has she worked here?" Keanu asked. Jason responded without thinking. "A little over a year." Then, realizing Keanu was asking real questions, he tensed. "Why?" Keanu shrugged, keeping his tone light. "Just wondering if she likes it here." Jason let out a short, humorless chuckle. "She doesn't," he admitted. "But she can't afford to leave." And there it was. Evelyn wasn't just overworked. She wasn't just stressed. She was trapped. Before Keanu could ask anything else, Jason's body suddenly went stiff. His fingers gripped the plates so tightly that Keanu worried they might break. His eyes darted straight ahead. His breathing became short. Keanu didn't need to turn around. He already knew why. The air in the room changed. It became heavy, thick with tension. Darren Mitchell was walking toward them. Darren moved with power. His polished shoes tapped steadily against the hardwood floor. His posture was tall, shoulders squared. He didn't just look at people, he studied them the way a lion studies prey. Keanu didn't turn right away. Instead, he watched Jason's reaction. The young waiter straightened immediately. His shoulders went rigid. His whole body braced for something like a kid caught doing something wrong, even though he had done nothing wrong at all. That told Keanu everything he needed to know. Darren wasn't just a strict manager. He was a bully. And Keanu wasn't going to let this continue. Darren reached the server station. He looked directly at Jason, ignoring Keanu completely. Problem? Darren asked, his voice cold. Jason swallowed. No, sir. Darren narrowed his eyes. Good. Get back to work. Keanu finally turned to face Darren. Their eyes met. And for the first time, Darren hesitated. Keanu wasn't just another customer. And Darren was about to find out exactly who he had been messing with. Keanu was in Mitchell's view. The manager stood near the host's stand, surveying the restaurant with a look that said he owned everything in it. The workers, the space, even the silence between conversations. Everything okay over here? Mitchell's voice was smooth, but there was something sharp in it, like a knife hidden under silk. It was the voice of a man who expected obedience. Jason, the young waiter standing nearby, swallowed hard. His hands twitched before he quickly looked down at the plates in front of him. Yes, sir. Just helping a customer. His voice was respectful, but the way his shoulders tensed betrayed him. Keanu, who had been silent until now, finally turned to meet Mitchell's gaze. The man looked sharp, mid-40s, dressed in a crisp navy blue dress shirt. His hair was neatly combed into place, not a strand out of order. He had the air of someone who had seen too much and cared too little. And the small smirk on his face? It wasn't friendly. It was possession. He believed he owned this place. The workers. The fear in their eyes. And right now he was testing Keanu. Can I help you with something? Mitchell asked, his voice polite but firm. This was a test. He wanted to see if Keanu would step back. Keanu didn't blink. Instead, he smiled easily and held up the pen that Jason had given him. Just needed this. Jason was kind enough to help me out. Mitchell didn't drop eye contact. His smirk twitched slightly. Then he reached out and clapped Jason on the shoulder. Too hard, too deliberate. Good, Mitchell said, his voice a little too controlled. Let's stay focused on work. Jason nodded quickly, almost robotically. Yes, sir. He turned back to the plates, moving with sudden urgency, like a man desperate to disappear. Keanu clenched his jaw but didn't react. Not yet. He had seen this before. Bosses who used power like a weapon. Men who ruled through fear. Mitchell wasn't just a tough manager. This was something worse. As Mitchell walked away, his presence still lingered like a shadow. Keanu exhaled slowly and turned back toward the bar, his mind racing. The signs were all there. The way Evelyn shrank in the break room. The way Jason hesitated before speaking. The way every employee avoided Mitchell's eyes. Fear. Not stress. Not exhaustion. Fear. And he needed to know why. Keanu wasn't leaving until he figured out exactly what Mitchell was doing to Evelyn, and how to stop it. Stepping outside, Keanu let the cool night air clear his frustration. From where he stood, it probably looked like he was just checking his phone. But in reality he was thinking. Then, as if fate was on his side, he saw Marcus. The bartender from earlier. Marcus was leaning against the side of the building, scrolling through his phone. This was his chance. Keanu walked toward him, hands in his pockets, voice calm but deliberate. Long night. Marcus looked up, startled for a second before recognizing Keanu. He let out a breath, rubbing the back of his neck. Yeah, man. Fridays are always rough. His voice was casual, but there was something underneath it. Fatigue. Weariness. Something unspoken. Keanu leaned against the wall beside him, keeping his posture relaxed. He had done this before, getting people to talk. He let the silence settle, let the moment breathe. Then, when the weight of it was just right, he spoke. Your manager, Mitchell. What's he like? Marcus's face flickered, just for a second, but it was enough. His lips pressed into a thin line before he forced a shrug. Strict, he said carefully. Likes things done a certain way. Keanu tilted his head slightly. That normal for managers? Marcus hesitated, glancing toward the restaurant entrance as if checking for someone. Then his voice dropped, just above a whisper. He's not just strict. He's worse. Keanu's jaw tightened. He already knew the answer. He just needed to hear it. What do you mean? Marcus exhaled sharply, shifting on his feet. Look, man, I try to mind my own business. But Evelyn, she's different. He glanced at the ground, then back at Keanu. She's the only one he makes stay late. Alone. Keanu's grip tightened at his sides. He kept his expression neutral, but inside, his blood was boiling. The only one? Marcus nodded. Yeah. And the way he talks to her? He shook his head, his voice laced with disgust. Like she owes him something. I've seen it, man. The way she tenses up when he calls her into his office. It's not normal. Keanu took a slow, measured breath, forcing himself to stay calm. He had seen this before. Men like Mitchell. Men who thrived on control. Men who singled out the most vulnerable and pushed them until they had nowhere else to go. She ever say anything about it? Keanu asked. Marcus shook his head. No. But she doesn't have to. We all see it. Keanu exhaled slowly. Now he knew. This wasn't just bad management. It was calculated. It was targeted. Mitchell had chosen Evelyn because she was young, because she was alone, because he thought no one would care. But he was wrong. Keanu straightened, clapping Marcus lightly on the shoulder. Thanks for telling me, he said, his voice steady. Marcus gave a half smile, but his eyes still held uncertainty. I don't know if that matters. Keanu met his gaze. It does. Then, without another word, he turned back toward the restaurant. Mitchell thought he owned this place. Thought he owned these people. Thought no one would stand up to him. That was about to change. Keanu stepped back inside. The restaurant had quieted as the dinner rush slowed. The scent of seared steak and butter still lingered, but the atmosphere had shifted. For Keanu, everything was different now. He wasn't just observing anymore. Now he was here for a reason. His eyes immediately found Evelyn. She was at the bar, taking an order from a customer. Her posture was straight. Her hands are steady. But Keanu wasn't fooled. Her eyes were hollow. The kind of exhaustion that wasn't just physical, but emotional. The weight of carrying something too heavy for too long. Then he caught movement from the corner of his eye. Darren Mitchell. Still near the host's stand. Still watching. Still in control. But not for much longer. Keanu took a slow breath, then moved. Not to Mitchell. Not yet. He walked straight to Evelyn. She noticed him approaching. Flicker of confusion. Who was he? Just another customer? But something about him made her hesitate. Her grip tightened around the notepad in her hands. Excuse me, Keanu said, just loud enough for the customer beside her to hear. I need to speak with you for a moment. Evelyn blinked, taken aback. I'm with a customer, sir. The woman she was serving frowned. She's helping me right now. You can wait. Keanu didn't break eye contact with Evelyn. It's important. Something in his voice made her pause. She swallowed, then muttered an apology to the customer and stepped away from the bar. The moment she did, Mitchell noticed. Keanu saw it. The way he straightened. The way his eyes narrowed across the restaurant floor. He didn't like losing control. Evelyn fidgeted with the hem of her apron. Her voice was low. What can I help you with, sir? Keanu exhaled slowly, keeping his voice steady but gentle. I know what's happening. Evelyn flinched. Just slightly. But enough. Fear flashed across her face. Fear of being exposed. Fear of being powerless. Fear of what would happen if she spoke up. You don't have to say anything, Keanu continued. I just need you to know. You're not alone. Evelyn shook her head. Her smile was tight, like she was trying really hard to hold it together. I don't know what you mean, she said. But Keanu wasn't giving up. Mitchell. The late shifts. The way he treats you, he said, his voice a little softer. It's not okay. Evelyn's hands curled into fists. She wasn't just tired. She wasn't just stressed. She was scared. Really scared. I can't, she whispered. Keanu's eyes softened. You can, he told her, leaning in just a little. Because I promise you, he's not untouchable. Before Evelyn could say anything, a shadow appeared beside them. Darren Mitchell. His presence felt cold, like a sudden chill in the air. His voice was smooth, but there was something hard underneath it. Is there a problem here? Mitchell asked. Keanu didn't turn right away. He watched how Evelyn tensed up at the sound of Mitchell's voice, how she gripped her apron so tight her knuckles turned white. That told him everything he needed to know. Finally, Keanu looked at Mitchell, his face calm but serious. Just having a conversation, Keanu said. Mitchell smiled, but his eyes were sharp. Well, Evelyn has a job to do. She doesn't have time for private chats. Keanu noticed how Evelyn flinched at the word private. That was it. That was the proof. Keanu straightened his shoulders, standing tall. He wasn't just another customer anymore. He was making sure Mitchell knew he was there. Actually, Keanu said, his voice calm but strong, I think we should have a conversation right now. Mitchell's smile twitched. Excuse me? Keanu reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. He flipped it open, showing his executive credentials for Tor's restaurant group. Evelyn gasped. The other servers froze. Mitchell's face lost all its color. Keanu looked him straight in the eye. My name is Keanu Reeves, he said loud enough for everyone to hear. And you and I need to talk. The whole restaurant went silent. The air felt heavy like a storm about to hit. The employees started, some with shock, some with hope. Keanu noticed something new in Mitchell's eyes, uncertainty. For the first time, the man who controlled everything looked unsure. Mitchell opened his mouth, trying to stay calm. Mr. Reeves, he said with a nervous laugh. I didn't realize. No, Keanu interrupted, his voice firm. You didn't. Evelyn stood completely still, her breathing shaky. She looked like she couldn't believe this was happening. Keanu turned to her, his voice gentle. You're safe now. Evelyn blinked. Her lips parted like she wanted to say something. For a moment she looked like she might cry. But then she took a deep breath and stood a little taller. It was like the heavy weight she had been carrying for so long was finally starting to lift. Mitchell's face was tight. His eyes darted around, looking for a way out. But there was none. Not this time. Sir, I assure you, he started, his voice tense. There's been a misunderstanding. If you'd allow me to. There's no misunderstanding, Keanu cut him off. His voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp like a knife. I know exactly what's been happening here. Mitchell stepped back. If we could just speak in private, I'd be happy to. No, Keanu said again, his voice even stronger. You had no problem humiliating Evelyn in front of everyone. We're doing this right here. Mitchell's face darkened. He tried to act tough one last time. I have done nothing wrong, he snapped. This is my restaurant to manage. I follow the rules. If Evelyn had a problem, she should have come to me instead of. Keanu pulled out his phone. He tapped the screen and a recording played. Evelyn's voice filled the room. It was shaky, afraid. What choice do I have? If I don't do what he says, I'm gone. A sharp gasp came from someone in the crowd. The servers stared at Mitchell. Customers turned in their seats. The whole restaurant, once full of chatter and clinking dishes, now felt like a frozen moment in time. Jason, standing by the kitchen, clenched his jaw. Marcus, the bartender, crossed his arms. They knew. They all knew. Mitchell's face turned pale. His lips moved, trying to form an excuse. But there was nothing he could say. Keanu stepped closer. His presence was bigger now, stronger. You've been playing this game for a long time, haven't you? Keanu said, his voice low but powerful. Preying on employees who need this job. Making them feel like they have no choice. Mitchell swallowed hard. His hands twitched. But let me be clear, Keanu continued. You just ran out of time. Mitchell's breath stuttered. He looked lost. Desperate. Please, he whispered, barely able to speak. I can explain. No, Keanu said, his voice final. You can't. He pulled up his contacts and dialed a number. The phone rang once. Twice. Then someone answered. This is Keanu Reeves, he said. I need to report a manager for misconduct. And I want to make sure he never works in this industry again. Mitchell's whole body slumped. His breath hitched. It was over. Keanu turned to the employees. This ends tonight, he told them. A quiet gasp ran through the crowd. For so long they had lived in fear. Walking on eggshells. Afraid to speak up. But now that fear was fading. Keanu looked at Evelyn again, his voice softer now. You okay? Evelyn let out a slow breath. And for the first time that night she smiled. It was small. Just a little. But it was real. Then from across the room Jason spoke. His voice was steady, strong. Sir, he said, this isn't just about Mitchell. Keanu turned to him. Go on. Jason looked around. His coworkers nodded, encouraging him. The way things work here, he said, it's not just one bad manager. The pressure, the way we're treated, the fear of speaking up. He shook his head. It's bigger than this restaurant. Keanu's jaw tightened. This was why he came undercover. Not for money. Not for numbers. For the people. He took a deep breath. Then he looked around the room. That stops today. His words settled in the air. Heavy. True. Mitchell had been the worst of them. But he wasn't the only problem. Fear. Silence. The way people felt powerless. It had been allowed to grow. To spread. Keanu had come to stop one bad man. But now he saw the bigger fight. Mitchell, still standing there, was pale and shaking. His lips trembled as he tried one last time. Sir, he stammered. I've worked in this industry for years. You can't just. I already have. Keanu cut him off. The phone in his hand crackled as a voice on the other end confirmed it. Mitchell was finished. His hands shook as Keanu turned away. He wasn't important anymore. Now Keanu focused on what really mattered. The employees. The people who had been afraid for too long. The ones who had learned to stay quiet, to accept that this was just how things worked. Not anymore. Keanu met their eyes. I don't just want to fix this restaurant, he said. His voice was steady, sure. I want to fix the system. Then he took a breath and said the most important thing of all. And I need your help to do that. Silence. Then something changed. The employees looked at each other. No one had ever asked for their voices before. No one had ever promised to listen. Evelyn was the first to speak. Her voice was quiet but strong. Keanu had never heard her sound like that before. What happens next? She asked. Keanu nodded like he had been waiting for that question. We start by making sure this never happens again. Not here. Not anywhere. He turned to the team. You've all been working for someone who didn't deserve to be in charge. That changes now. Marcus, the bartender, crossed his arms. His eyes were sharp. So, we just get a new manager and move on? Keanu shook his head. No. This is bigger than just one person. He took a deep breath. From now on, this restaurant will have new rules. There will be training for everyone, new leaders watching over things, and a way for people to report problems without being scared. No one should ever be afraid to speak up. Jason, who had always stayed quiet, finally stood taller. And if we do? If we speak up? Keanu looked him right in the eyes. Then someone listens. For the first time that night, the workers let out a breath they had been holding. Keanu looked at Evelyn. She was standing straighter now, her shoulders no longer heavy with worry. This wasn't just about their old manager, Mitchell. This was about giving them back their voices. Tonight, they had finally been heard. The news about Mitchell spread through the restaurant like ripples in water. At first it was small, but it kept growing. Employees whispered to each other, still unsure but braver than before. For the first time in a long time, the fear was fading. But Keanu knew this wasn't over. Not even close. He had just stepped away when his phone buzzed. Then it buzzed again. And again. He checked the screen. His stomach tightened. Someone had recorded everything. The argument, the moment Keanu revealed who he really was, the way Mitchell tried to escape but couldn't. And now, it was online. It was spreading fast. Thousands of people had already seen it. Keanu took a deep breath. He had always tried to stay out of the spotlight when it came to personal matters. He never wanted to be famous. Never wanted to be the center of attention. But this wasn't about him. A voice pulled him from his thoughts. He turned. Evelyn was staring at him. Her face was hard to read. For a moment, he wondered if she was going to ask him to delete the video to make the world forget. But then she took a deep breath. And what she said next made his chest tighten. I don't want anyone else to go through this. Keanu nodded slowly. They won't. She searched his face. How can you be sure? He glanced at his phone again. The numbers were still climbing. More and more people were watching. Because now they have to listen. Evelyn blinked. Then slowly she smiled. Not out of relief. Not out of gratitude. Out of something much stronger. She believed him. At the bar, Jason and Marcus were looking at their own phones. The realization hit them. This wasn't just a small victory for their restaurant. This was a wake-up call for everyone. Keanu turned back to the other workers. They were still standing there, waiting, watching. He met their eyes. This isn't just about us. This is about making sure this doesn't happen anywhere. To anyone. Someone in the back murmured, people need to know the truth. Keanu nodded. And now they do. The world was watching. The voices that had been silenced for so long were finally being heard. And Keanu? He wasn't done yet. Outside, the night air was cool. Keanu stepped out of the restaurant, his breath steady. Inside, the workers were still talking. But it wasn't like before. Something had changed. A heavy weight had been lifted. He watched as the employees locked up for the night. But this time, they weren't moving like they were exhausted. They weren't hunched over with stress. They were lighter. Freer. Evelyn walked out with Jason and Marcus. They were talking but not whispering in fear. They were having a real conversation. For the first time in a long time, they weren't looking over their shoulders. Evelyn caught sight of Keanu standing by the curb. She stopped. For a moment she just looked at him. Like she couldn't believe this had really happened. Like she couldn't believe Mitchell was gone. Like she couldn't believe someone had actually listened. Keanu met her gaze. "You okay?" She let out a slow breath. "I think I will be." A small, real smile touched her lips. Not just relief. Not just gratitude. Strength. Jason hesitated, then stepped forward. "Do you really think this changes anything?" His voice wasn't doubtful. Just honest. Keanu checked his phone. The video had exploded online. News stations were picking it up. People from everywhere were sharing their own stories just like Evelyn's. "It already has," Keanu said simply. Jason and Marcus exchanged a look. Something unspoken passed between them. "Oh." Evelyn looked down for a moment, then lifted her head again. "You said you wanted to fix the system." Keanu nodded. "I do." She studied him. Then, with quiet determination, she said, "Then I want to help." Keanu felt something settle inside him. Something solid. This wasn't just about one restaurant, one night, one bad manager. This was about all the places just like Torque's. All the people are still stuck, still scared. The fight wasn't over. Not even close. Keanu gave her a small nod. "Then let's get to work." Evelyn nodded back. And as they walked into the night, the revolution had only just begun. Racism isn't just something from the past. It's still here. It hides in workplaces behind fake smiles and unfair rules. It's in the way people of color are given the worst jobs, the lowest pay, the harshest treatment. And they're expected to just stay quiet. Evelyn's story isn't special. It happens to millions of people. But silence lets it continue. Fear keeps the system alive. Change only happens when we face it, call it out, and refuse to accept it as just the way things are. No one should suffer because of the color of their skin. We may not change the world overnight, but we can start by speaking up. If you enjoyed this story, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and let me know what you think. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more exciting stories filled with adventure, mystery, and unforgettable moments. Your support means the world. It keeps these stories coming and the creativity flowing. Thanks for watching, and I can't wait to see you in the next video.